Good morning, everyone. This is going to be a great episode of Money Talks. We demoed this at the spring conference when it was um, Andy and myself doing a quasi unofficial Money Talks. We thought it went well. So we're going to do it again today, just with Andy and I. Mike's actually under the weather, so he's not going to be on today. Andy, how are things going?
We are doing great today. I am in the polo summer mode, so things are excellent. And I might even be wearing shorts, but don't tell anybody.
Yeah, don't stand up. So we may not go the whole time. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully, it'll be much more discussion based. There's a lot of items here, but we're not going to get super in depth into them. It's more forecasting what next year is going to bring. So as always, I'm Brian Adesso. Andy's here with me. Mike's again sick. We're not attorneys or lobbyists. These are our own opinions. We're just having fun and trying to educate people.
And this one's going to be a short one for once. So
Yeah, don't promise that. So June's topics. Andy grows up and leaves us. Sorry, Andy. Big trends for 26, 27. So again, this is probably forecasting what some of our future episodes will be on as we dig in further. And what's everyone doing for summer? As you can see, the Andy grows up theme is um, maybe a movie that's out right now.
yeah, and in that movie, by the way, the character comes back. So no promises what happens here in the future.
I'm assuming you saw it, Andy.
I have not seen it, but I've seen outtakes of it. So
Uh,
uh,
I didn't
here's
know if
what.
I didn't know if you were crying or something. If it's a crying one, because some of them were crying ones.
Yeah, yeah. That's why our leader picked it, I think. But he wasn't anticipating Toy Story 5 coming out. Sorry, I said that word.
All right, now into our top 10 trends for 26, 27. So student to staff ratio dilemma. So we've all witnessed this. There's a great policy forum. It's actually a pretty quick read, 4 pages. There's a lot of great graphs in it. But Menasha, just like probably Oregon, maybe Oregon isn't, but we've been declining for many years. We seem to be averaging around 50 students each year that we decline. Um, our forecasts are showing bigger declines coming up here. But as we've talked about, school districts don't downsize easily, just because we don't usually have like all 50 kids are first graders in one building. We have uh, 4 elementary schools, and I think we'd all agree that it would be great if, all those 50 kids could come out of one grade school in one grade. Andy, what does it look like for you in Oregon?
Yeah. So what's kind of interesting about our story is, we were actually projected to be back in 2017 or so, one of the faster growing Dane County school districts, and the student growth hasn't materialized, but we've kind of held our own, so to speak. We're pretty well flat as far as that. And what everybody's experiencing around Dane County is pretty much, smaller class sizes coming in, larger class sizes going out. And so you need to grow in order to just hold your own. And so, um, very fortunate to be in that situation compared to a lot of our counterparts. But that's kind of what's happening around the Madison area. It's lots of people moving back in, moving into the metropolitan area, and bringing some kids, but just barely holding their own, if that.
It was interesting. The study it said from 2011 to 2026, our student enrollment fell by 9.2%. And a lot of this is attributed to lower birth rates. Through that same time period, 3.2% of schools, we had less schools, so not necessarily school districts, but buildings closing. But at that same time, paraprofessionals and teachers grew by 5.5%, and non-classroom licensed staff grew by almost 16%. And just to break down that teacher and para, a lot of that was para growth by a 30%, almost 31% increase in that. And a lot of those parapros are unlicensed too. I mean, it seems like if I was to look at this information, kind of think about it and kind of knowing education, it seems like we're trying to get more bodies in the classroom to help, whether it's behaviors or help with education. Andy and I were talking about before we started that education's changed a lot in the last decade or so compared to prior to that when uh, education was the same. You know, we taught it the same way for hundreds of years, and then everything kind of got turned upside down, and things were changed. So then we had to bring on uh, coaches and interventionists, um, and then we also talked about the kind of that baby boomer generation is kind of retiring off, and we're having a lot of new staff members. So and we're experiencing that every year. I'm sure Andy, you're experiencing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely more specialists, as well as more students with special needs that are bringing in paraeducators or EAs, that type of thing, additional staff, special education staff, and then kind of like what you were alluding to. And this was actually something that happened even before COVID, where we were looking at coaches and basically some of the turnover that we're starting to have a little bit more turnover than we've experienced in the past. We just need to help these new educators kind of find their stride, so to speak. And with the turnover that happens in education, I think the intent is to try to help them feel comfortable in the classroom and to be able to retain them, because we all know what it takes to get a new educator and bring them up to speed in our different systems.
Danielle, do you have any opinion on any of this? Because this was kind of your world that you lived in prior to WASBO.
I mean, yeah, it's tricky because, as you said, like we've had so many higher student needs, and we are seeing in the classroom that some of the mental health stuff is, I don't want to say necessarily improving, but we're finding a better balance than we have previously. But like I would say, post-COVID, things are kind of getting better. And so there could be this inclination to start to pull away some of those supports that got put in place. But it's those supports that are helping helping that balance. And so, when you're looking at the budget situation, it's a tricky call as to, those are pretty high cost staffing pieces, but pulling them away could, revert back to some of the challenges we were facing, post COVID. So it's it's just tricky as to figure out which way you should go when you're looking at what to do with your staffing levels here.
And this is probably something that we need to, work with our other educational organizations too, to kind of develop a unified message around this, because we all know it's super easy to say that you dropped 50 kids, your student to teacher ratio is 25 to 1, so we should be seeing at least two teachers be laid off. And we really need to, I think, develop some kind of easy to understand. Because I personally, I'm not certain that schools don't downsize well really meets the muster. I mean, we understand that, but I think the public, they're like, really? Like,
Yeah. I think that, and I think it was maybe Anne that said this a few months back, and Brian, you were sort of alluding to it, right? That just the most simple way to explain this, and I was doing our Leveraging Technology Academy yesterday, who were not just business managers in the room, And I said this and it kind of got a lot of head nods. It's just that idea that, right, like you add 50 students, but they're spread out. And so you don't have to necessarily increase staff, but you do increase your revenues by 50 students. You lose 50 students, you lose the revenue of 50 students, but you don't, they're spread out. You can't necessarily cut that staff, as you said. And so when you say it sort of that way, I think it's simple enough for the common sort of public to understand, like, oh, yeah, I guess that does make sense that if you're a second grade classroom goes from 23 students to 22 students because only one of those 50 students came out of second grade, you can't cut a teacher. It makes a little more sense that way.
Yeah, I when I read that forum report, I totally agree with both of you, but Brian on the messaging side of it, people need to understand this nuance. Like all staff are not serving the same purpose. This is not just a numbers ratio math problem where we have to improve the ratios because that student need piece of it. It's like people do understand student needs are going up, but they don't understand what that means about staffing and how that will change ratios. So anyway, I'm just underscoring that messaging piece is really important because that idea that we have administrative bloat, that's sort of the trope that is thrown at public education. So yeah, figuring out how to help people understand what those staff are and what their roles are, and to your point, Danielle, what they are doing to allow us to improve and advance student outcomes.
Yeah, and the other thing to note too is that the legal requirements of what has to be taught, it continues to increase. And I'm not saying that you know, those changes in what we should be teaching students is good or bad. I'm just saying the list is getting longer. And, if we just had teachers still teaching the exact same thing they were teaching 50 years ago, we could do this math a lot easier. But there's a lot of additional legal requirements now. If you take ACP, for example, at the upper grade levels, right? ACP is an add-on and an important add-on because it teaches a lot of life skills. It teaches a lot of financial, personal, finance skills, career planning, all good stuff. But who's teaching that? Is that the classroom teacher in addition to, or, that's where schools have been bringing on counseling staff to do that, or ACP coordinators or other staff. We can't necessarily cut them because they're teaching a legal requirement. And so that's the piece too, is that legal list is really, really long. And so the more that gets added to what must be taught, somebody has to do that. And a teacher, an English teacher just simply just doesn't have that time in their day. They don't, there's a capacity issue there.
Yeah, so definitely a topic that we probably need to come back to. I mean, because those three main things that, we don't downsize well. Uh, our needs are also changing, getting more extreme, and the requirements on us continue to increase, whether it be, yeah, we need to teach everything now.
Mhm.
Andy, anything further to add? No.
Can't hear you, Andy.
This is Andy's way of getting out of doing
Yeah,
money talks.
yeah.
All right, then our second topic, and I promise we won't spend that long on all of them. But it's really the healthcare costs, and I'm sure all of you understand these healthcare costs. I mean, you see it. It's your second largest line item in the budget. It's been growing by double digits. Some of us have been lucky enough to experience renewals and, the 50% range that, magically get down to 20%. And we're supposed to feel happy about that when it's on millions of dollars. It's just super expensive. In the report here that the Crow Research. So it stands for the Center of Research on the Wisconsin Economy. So it's out of UW-Madison. They provided a study on this, and this dates back way back to even the ACA or Obamacare days. If you remember that, I mean, President Obama visited Wisconsin because we were one of the highest cost states in the nation. That hasn't changed. Um, we're still very high up there. Some fun facts: our hospital service costs nationally have surged 260% in since 2000. For Wisconsin, our household incomes have increased by 83% in that same time frame, and the CPI is 77%. Now, to put that into terms that we all understand, family health insurance, we know this because, when we did the OPEB benefits way back when, they were super cheap. At that time, it was probably $1,200 for the year for a family plan. The study shows that from 1999, family plan went from $5,800 to just over $27,000 in Wisconsin. Um, so in the state, hospitals now charge they're fourth highest in the nation for cost. So obviously that's what's driving a lot of the cost, which is kind of interesting. The other really fascinating point is that the utilization for Wisconsin, we're 6% below the national average. So we're using less healthcare, but it's also way more expensive. I don't know if those two are correlated, because a lot of the costs, in the private sector are borne by the employees. So I don't know if it's becoming more expensive to do it. Um, and then some of the fun facts that, we've kind of all heard, you can usually go like next door to another provider, especially for imaging, and you can get an MRI for $500 to $600, and then you can go down the street and get the same MRI for $4,000 or $5,000. Exact same one. They'll tell you it's not the same one because it came out of the semi trailer or whatever. Well, if you go around back their facility, that same semi trailer is parked there because their MRI machine is down and they're using the same one. So, I mean, there are some differences in technology, but most of them are the exact same that have kept up. I know in our area, a knee replacement, you can go north of us, $60,000 for a knee replacement, or you can go to one where we have a direct contract with, and it's $15,000. So obviously, like all of our employees don't get knee replacements every year, but those things all add up, and it's something that I would love to dig into more on a future episode. Because I've always believed this is one area that if we can control the cost, we really make back what we're being paid in salaries and benefits. Because none of us are being paid millions of dollars. At least I don't think so. I mean, I am not.
I haven't heard anybody that's done that. I think what is interesting, and I remember having this conversation when I was in district with John Gahan, is how do we get our staff members to shop these things, right? Because the healthcare system is so convoluted that it's really hard to understand, where do you shop for the best price? If I need to go get ibuprofen, I know I can like go to Walmart and I can go to Target and I can look at their off brands compared to Advil and I will see, who has the best price. I can understand that model. But if I, like you said, need an MRI, okay, well, I have my doctor's recommendation and then what, right? Like I see the billboards for those MRI places, but are they legitimate? Can I do that? Will my insurance cover it? How do I find out? Then now I got to make a call to my insurance company. Like it's so complicated for I think the average employee that people just go, I'm just going to go where my doctor sends me. And more likely than not, that's going to be the most expensive option on the table. So I would love if anybody has good strategies for how to get your employees to shop these or how you provide information to your employees about how to best, navigate it. That I think that's the trickiest part because I don't think the educators are going to end up convincing the healthcare system that they got to change their ways. So, how do we help our folks navigate it?
The crazy thing there is that, like the way we talked about, economics and things and how we buy everything else is usually the more expensive something is, the better it is. And in healthcare, it's actually almost reverse, because the ones that are doing kind of the right things and care about their trade and doing a lot of them are a lot cheaper. Um, it's just it's a weird thing. And then, going back to what you said, Danielle, about the doctor referring things, we've talked to doctors, and it's interesting how they refer for other services. They referred based on if they know the person and like if they're a good person.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
no idea, that the doctor that's replacing the knee, how many legs have they lost? And that
Right.
they don't know. They just know that they're a good person, and hey, I'll, refer to Dr. John because whatever.
Yeah. Well, and in the chat, Terry makes a good point too, that in the northern part of our state, there's very limited options, right? So that's gonna, add to that, stat that you had said, right, that we're like fourth highest in healthcare costs. I would imagine, I don't know this to be true, but I would guess that when you have more rural parts in your state, if you're a state that has more rural parts, that's going to definitely drive your healthcare costs up as well. So I think that's a really good point.
And we've been going through major consolidations too of health systems, and that doesn't help things either. I mean, Freighter just bought Theta, Gunderson bought Bellin. These are huge systems, and then Ascension's already a Goliath overall. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's not good, and that kind of adds to the whole rural Wisconsin and not having the providers,
Yeah.
and having to travel long distances.
So, not to change the subject, but I'm concerned that Andy grew up and became Brian. So this is bothersome to me that we now have two Brians on the call. Welcome back. I guess Brian.
Brian shared his link with me. So, hey, but I'm green around the corner, so you can hear me again. Good.
Well, welcome back.
Man, I look really handsome. Andy, do you have anything before we go to the next?
On health insurance, yeah, I've been around long enough, which is when I get to retire, I guess, where I remember in the early 2000s when, from a federal perspective, there was some pressure actually on healthcare, and rates actually I remember zeros and 2%. And I think some of the federal things that are happening are kind of destabilizing healthcare a little bit as well. And I think that's another part of this equation that unfortunately I don't know that there's a great answer to right now.
This issue is actually creating some weird alliances that maybe wouldn't be aligned. Like the Wisconsin Manufacturing and Commerce and Will and all these institutions, along with public entities, because it's a global issue. It's not just affecting schools, it's affecting businesses, it's affecting everyone. So hopefully we can get to transparency and transparency with teeth, because I don't know how you do it without that. Like Danielle, you said, I mean, we can go to Walmart and Target and see the prices. Obviously, that's very simplistic. Um, you still don't know the quality metrics if you're going to get
Hmm.
your knee done. You want to, you probably don't want to go to someone's van to get your knee done because it's, $500.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated.
All right. Operational referendum versus voter fatigue. Um, I don't know if this is so much voter fatigue. As I'm reading more and more stuff, it seems like nationally people are just tired of taxes. They don't want to pay for anything. And that's aligning with property taxes, it's aligning with income taxes. It's just I don't know. I don't know what the switch is, but I guess we as Americans feel like we can get the service without having to pay for it. My
Yeah,
own personal viewpoint.
from a statewide perspective, right? What happened in the state budget put pressure on property taxes because there was no additional funding to compensate for the increased revenue limit authority. So that, you know, we understand where that's coming from. I think what you're talking about is more of an overall concept about taxes, right? And that is interesting because, you know, from my perspective, if we would anticipate a CPI increase, everything gets more expensive. Why wouldn't that include the services that you pay for with your taxes, right? And as Ann has shared with people, really from a percentage basis, we're at a point where we're actually at an all-time low as far as what we're paying for taxes. Yet that perception exists.
From a tax burden perspective, yeah.
Yeah.
As a percent of income, we're at an all-time low in Wisconsin, and we're lower than all of our neighboring states. But that doesn't seem to translate to when people have to pay their property tax bills.
Right.
At least they don't feel that. Yeah.
Because you
Well,
get one bill.
yeah, and you get to pay it in 2 payments if you want, right? But that's still not spread out over time, where
Right.
it's not felt as much.
Right. That's a good point.
I mean, it's interesting too because I think most people don't really like pay their property taxes because they get their bill and then they get this magical check that covers the bill. You know, obviously that's from their escrow payments that they've been making on their mortgage. But I don't believe a ton of people are cutting checks from their own bank accounts, to pay that tax bill.
It's a
I mean,
good point.
yes, you know,
People that have mortgages, which you would think the majority of folks probably do, are, you know, escrowing that money, and that would not hurt as much. But I guess you still see that big check, right? So it's still a psychological impact.
yeah. I mean, who writes out a check for $10,000, every year or whatever it is?
But at least it comes during the holiday season, so that's always helpful.
Not January, right after.
Right, yeah,
Oops.
yeah, yeah, you know, reminds you to buy one less toy for your kids.
I mean, we did kind of see this through our operational referendum that it's just that property tax fatigue and people just want things to be cheaper. And, we're in a high inflation environment too, and we have been for a long time. And I think people are just at their breaking point and in a conundrum.
I think you have people at different ends of the spectrums too, right? And you have folks that aren't in the stock market and that type of thing, and they feel these things very, very quickly. They don't have the money in their, the amount of money that they should need for one-time expenses that could come up. And then you have people in the stock market that are feeling pretty good about things right now, at least. So there's that dynamic that's going on in our country as well.
Well, I think it's human nature to want an ROI, right, on your investments. And taxes are one where you get an ROI at bits and pieces, right? If your house goes on is on fire, you get a huge ROI, right? For that service you've been paying for. When your children are in school, good ROI, and you can see it daily in your lives. But there's a lot of taxes we all pay that, on a day-to-day basis, year-to-year basis, we don't necessarily feel it. And it's human nature to want to feel like what you're investing is giving you some kind of return. And so, I think it makes sense why people would be like, yes, especially with schools in some ways, right? Like once like you're not going to get an ROI on that personally anymore, like it becomes really hard to sometimes, I think, justify that existential, like we're all in this together. It's a societal thing. Like we can say that, we know that to be true, but when you're struggling to get groceries and you're struggling to pay your other bills, like the betterment of society as a whole and that existential reason why we pay taxes, it's a lot harder to justify.
Well, we saw that in COVID, right? Like that, some of the strategies in order to reduce the transmission and stuff like that had this concept where you had to think about the betterment of everyone compared to the impact on yourself. And that didn't go well in some places.
Yeah, I was going to say that buy-in to public education and public schools as a common good it's not as much of a given as it used to be for people. That is part of it. And then the other piece is just like the technical complication of property taxes and what causes them to go up and how those things interact. Like it could have been just your property value went up, relative to other things. And that's a good thing, but also it raises your taxes and all those things too. Yeah.
I think people just, it's one of those things you don't know what you have until it's gone. Kind of leading us into our next one that, it all sounds great to close an elementary school or whatever, or, you vote for it and then the next year happens and now people aren't very happy with it. And, or, you get rid of a program or whatever. We had a world language program here and we put it up for referendum a long time ago and people didn't want to support it and then it was gone. And they're like, why don't we have a world language program? Well, no one wanted it, like there's choices and when you have that neighborhood school that's no longer a neighborhood school and kids are walking a little bit further, it's just
which you should expect to some degree if we're reducing students, right? Like that's a natural outcome of that. But yeah, that's an identity of a neighborhood. That's an identity of a community. We live in a situation where Fitchburg would love a school district. Instead, they have three, and they feel like that's difficult at times for them to kind of work through because so much of an identity can be connected to a school district.
yeah. So I mean, we've talked about the closures and some of the reports and things, and obviously, I think this is going to be continuing because everyone on this job or on this call, has a job to do, and I think we're all creative and we think of ways to reduce funding. It doesn't mean that we don't want neighborhood schools. It just means that, we're there to provide, solutions to problems. It's not that, those solutions will be approved or accepted, but I think we're all looking for ways to trim our budgets and, building closures are one way. We all know too, buildings aren't super expensive to operate. It's the staff in them that's the expensive piece. That's where the savings come from because usually when you close a building and move kids into other buildings, you don't need all the staff. You do need, some of the staff, and especially like when we go back to those high needs people, students that you usually need to keep all those staff because students still need to be served. So it might be classroom teachers because your ratio goes up by, 3 or 4 students per class, depending on the size of the buildings.
Yeah, the advantage is you don't need maybe a couple custodian or so. You don't need a librarian. You don't need the principal. There are those fixed costs that you're going to save a little bit, and then it's just the flexibility that you're going to gain by having a larger number of students in a space. That the impact of a couple kids moving here or there doesn't require you maybe to add a teacher. That really helps you.
So, I don't know if you guys know, but I was a history teacher by trade. And so, not too long ago, I was doing some reading on Wisconsin schools and its history. So, 90 years ago in 1936, either of you want to take a gander at how many school districts we had in the state of Wisconsin?
Probably 800.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
7,700.
Wow. I
Yeah.
mean, that makes sense because like every town and like
Yeah.
everyone, it was like all their own district.
All the one room schoolhouses, right? All scattered really in every single community. And so, um, you know, in the 1940s and 50s, they really started consolidating them into like the districts that we see now, right? And even in Wisconsin, where we still have community school districts, right? There's a lot of states that have countywide school districts, and that's their model for how to consolidate, all of those rural and even suburban and urban communities down. And so, I think it's tricky when we're talking about, all of whether it's the number of buildings, whether it's the number of districts, we've ebbed and flowed all over the place, over the history of our state and our school districts. I think what's tricky now is that we're a generation of educators who haven't had to do this, right? Because we were educating the baby boomer children and their grandchildren, and now that we're getting into their great grandchildren, we're not seeing those numbers anymore. So that's going to be the challenge that we have to face, over the next handful of years. So it's definitely going to be interesting. It's not new to our state though to need to um, contract in this way, but new to us.
It is fascinating. Inflationary, I don't even want to talk about inflationary budget stress. I mean, especially since the Fed chair just said he's going to raise the rates instead of lowering them. Um, yeah. Andy, do you have anything?
Hey, that means more interest revenue. I'm looking for the rainbow here. Heavy stuff today, so maybe our interest revenues will increase a little bit if you got some money in the bank.
I mean, the important thing on here is that, on your budget forecast, on your budgets, you may want to tick some of those expenses up a little bit higher and just make sure that you're covering them, because your standard contracts are usually linked to CPI, and a lot of us gets John's thing, two on salary, and now we look like we're back up in the 4 to 5% range for an increase next year. It's just things to keep on your radar.
The other thing that I just saw this morning that it went to my personal email is ETF did release the rates for 2027. It's only up 5 basis points, so 0.05%. So it is up a little bit. So you have to think about, basically the payrolls that start after July 1st. But I had budgeted 0, so that's going to have a little bit of an impact on us, but not huge.
Andy, you'll be retiring, and you're in that 7-figure range in your replacement. So we've talked about staff reductions, and there's the Act 10, and I think this is kind of leaning into the lawsuit and all that. And I think this will be a future topic that we're monitoring. I know we hear from our union all the time, Act 10 is being thrown out, and I think the perception is that if the Supreme Court overturns it the next day, we'll have the CBAs back in place and negotiation and all that. And I would think that would be pushed back to the legislators to figure out and get set up.
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and there's the money piece too, but we've beat this to a bloody pulp here. I heard that there was like some glimmering hope, but I'm going to say that there is not. And if you want to be optimistic, you can hold on to a 1% chance that they may come back, but I would not go over a 1% chance. I think both sides just have their own reasons. We know that there's a lot of entities that need a lot of funding. So. Andy, you want to beat it anymore, or you're good?
No, this one, I feel like I've been on the roller coaster a little bit too much, and my stomach's a little upset. So.
Yeah, I was way too optimistic. I mean, it made too much sense. School funding lawsuit. Ann did an amazing job with a great write-up. I quickly read it this morning. Probably should have read it way before then. But it kind of reminded me back to being in my master's program at Whitewater. It was kind of like a condensed version of the whole program in 16 pages.
Well, hopefully
only
people.
12.
Yeah, it's only 12. It's not that bad. Yeah, I mean, hopefully it's skimmable. Like, the headings will allow you to kind of go to the area you care about. But the idea
of white space. There's lots of white space.
Yeah, some white space. And
Pictures.
no pictures, which I apologize for. I decided not to go with pictures. We just made it longer. But the idea behind it is this lawsuit is pretty, it's a big deal in the sense that it's been a quarter of a century since the school finance system has been looked at by the courts. And there's a lot of implications to what has changed since it was last looked at. And it's going to be a long process. But the outcome of the process, whether it is the court having to step in to sort of make the legislature address the problems we've all been talking about forever and ever, or the legislature just goes ahead and does it because, in a sense, because this lawsuit is in place, it's going to have implications for us as school finance people and as school leaders. And in the end, no matter what happens, we will have a role to play in the advocacy process, in the legislative process. This is going to have to take no matter what happens with this court. And so we got to keep doing what we do. I do want to point out that what this lawsuit is pointing to and what it's talking about and the data and evidence it presents is all the same stuff that all of us talk about. These are like black and white technical school finance issues that they're talking about. This is not really a politicized thing. And so, it aligns very squarely with the messaging we've been putting out forever. And, increasingly we've been very focused in our messaging. And so, we're going to keep a watch on it. We're going to keep you all informed about it, as it unfolds. But it's going to have big implications for all of us. And hopefully, in an optimistic way, it's going to, there's a section of the report that talks about how litigation has become a last resort because legislative efforts have not yielded anything substantial for us, even after the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding that was bipartisan. Litigation is happening because legislation hasn't worked. So hopefully it will work. And in the end, legislation will be forced to address these issues. So
it was
Fascinating that, there was the six main kind of claims and how, they kind of stack on each other. Like if this one fails, we have this one. And then if this one fails, we have this one. It goes, I think, 3 layers deep that they can kind of fail on their arguments and still kind of win if some of the other arguments, weren't taken up. So I think it's very, very thorough. I also thought that the people should read what's the lawsuit not asking for,
right.
Because that's really important because you hear all the talking heads out there saying, this is to stop voucher program, this is to, do all this stuff. It's really not, and it's also not asking the Supreme Court to change the finance formula. It's really pushing it back to the state government to do their job.
Brian has cut out for me. I don't know if he has for everybody else.
Oh, he's good. You're good, Brian.
Oh, and Andy's back. So, no, it's asking the legislators to do their job. It's not using the Vincent Voigt on equity and funding. It is talking about how our different students, which we've talked about a lot, we have, very, very different needs. Again, we mentioned about the property or the parental choice programs. It's not going after that. They do want to join the suit, which I'm assuming that they probably feel like if they're part of the suit, then their hand is also out at the same time that everyone else's hand is out, but that's not really what it's about.
Well, yeah, they're trying to say, I think they're worried. I think I can give you an update on that, by the way. There was a hearing, I think about a week and a half ago, where the judge did provide a ruling on whether the interests that wanted to join the lawsuit because they were voucher parents and voucher stakeholders were not allowed to join the lawsuit because the judge said this is not about public schools, just as we wrote in the article. This is about public schools. So voucher schools is not pertinent to this lawsuit. because any outcome like we wrote out of this court will not directly affect vouchers. So that's sort of encouraging. There's just going to be efforts to try to, number one, kind of slow the process down for those that don't want this to go forward, and number two, to just try to protect interests that they worry might be affected by ultimately what happens legislatively could affect vouchers, but that wouldn't be a result of the court.
Yeah, I mean,
all I'll say is, I've been back in Wisconsin since 2000, when and that was shortly after Vincent D. Boyd, and I can't imagine a better case at this point in time to look at the school funding and the path that we've been on. It just makes so much sense. So I have high hopes, even though I'm not going to be in this role, that this does change some things. And it's crazy how much the Blue Ribbon Commission recommendations would have helped in this situation.
and I do believe too. I mean, if you look at all the different sources of, school spending done at the state level, I mean, there's a lot of resources being put to K-12. It's just not a lot going to the classroom. The thing that we always get railed on that, we need to spend more closely, just right to the classroom. I mean, the state probably needs to, look at themselves in the mirror and kind of do the same thing and, spend more towards the classroom and get those funds, like the levy tax credit and all those things. I mean, there's a lot of funding that's going outside that's considered school funding.
Right. Yeah, I talk about that too when we talk about declining enrollment and asking, schools to right size. The school finance system could stand some right sizing as well in certain ways.
Just making it simpler would be huge. I mean, there's got to be a way to do that because it's job security for all of us, but it's just makes the job so much harder than it needs to be.
And to your point too, I mean, with declining enrollment, I mean, it is going to become less costly for the state to run public education with the current model that they have, just because there's fewer students. I mean, everything's driven
Right.
on a per student basis.
Right. Which is one of the things I talk about that, the state could consider is, keep the spending at the level it's at to allow for districts to have the resource, because we keep talking about we need more resources. So the state could end up, in a sense, spending at similar levels, and yet on a per pupil basis, districts would be doing much better and would have better resources. Yeah, there's lots of ways to think about it. Yeah.
So definitely a topic that will come through this next year. This shocked me. I don't know about you, Andy. 40% of Wisconsin schools ran a budget deficit last year. Well, 2 years. Well, yeah, it's last year. I don't know which year it is. We're right at the end. But 40%. I mean, that's crazy.
I think I would put an asterisk on this, and when we were getting ready for this, I mentioned this. Some districts do this concept of carryover, which means you like school budgets. If you don't spend it all at the end of the year, districts will figure out a way to assign that to fund balance for the following year, and then allocate that money to those schools so that they can utilize it. It takes out all the issues associated with timing, with summer purchases and everything, and from my perspective, kind of gets rid of some foolish purchases that we would sometimes see. So we in Oregon do that. So we're part of that 40%. But if when I talk to the school board, I don't tell them we're running a deficit. I show them the numbers, but I also show, well, it's coming from assigned fund balance. It's from prior years or leftover spending. So that's a part of that. Maybe I don't know how much of it. That would be interesting to dive a little deeper there.
Andy,
Yeah,
I mean, you think it like 20 school districts do that? I mean, we're still at like 150 districts that are running a deficit.
Yeah, I don't know how pervasive that is. When I've talked about that with different groups, MASBO, for instance, there are some people that do it. So I'm sure my friend Pete would figure out a way to find some accounting code and some crazy database and be able to tell us that. But we'll have to dive deeper on that.
Yeah, I was going to ask Andy, because that practice of using carryover, do you think that's increased in recent years? Because Pete's analysis shows that the number of districts that are in, doing this, it has grown in recent years.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. I would think that that's probably more indicative of struggles that school districts are having. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Spending gaps, geez, like it must have been really hard for us to get to the top 10 because I feel like three or four of these are all kind of the same. Just because we have 10 slides doesn't mean that we have 10 different ideas here.
I brought that up. In our, but we had to have top 10.
Well, it sounds better if you have top 10. But we've talked a lot about the referendums and not approving and the equity and between students, and I think this all kind of wraps into it, and it's kind of the theme that's emerging, that'll be with us for a while. That um,
And it all comes down to referendums. If your community is willing to support a referendum, but I think that's going to get harder. And the Marquette study shows that that's things are changing a little bit, or more than a little bit. So I don't know that that's the solution for us in the future.
So, this is kind of a foreshadowing of the year. I'm sure we'll have other topics. We like to try to keep things fresh and timely when kind of news breaks. But we'll have a next biennium this next year, so that'll be fun. We all love that, because they get it done in like what, January, February, right? Yeah,
That's when it starts, Brian.
yeah. That I count on whatever they say. That's what it's going to be.
We'll have a new governor too, so they're in the lines a little bit more anxiety for you all.
Yeah. So, congrats to you, Andy, on your retirement. You made it. That's great. I mean, no, we wish you the best. And do you have any fun summer plans for your kind of last summer?
I got kind of my own three-legged stool, if everybody remembers that. My three-legged stool is a family, kind of recreation and travel. So those are my focuses. And after a few minutes here, kind of closing down the office after this podcast, I am headed to see my granddaughter. We were anointed as the caretakers over the weekend, so my son can go to a wedding. So that's more of that will probably happen. But I was trying to think of something deep to say at the end of this, and all I can say is, a lot of us folks that we find in these jobs are people that count things, right, and value money, obviously, because that's our job. But time is one of those resources that just ticks away. So this is my way of kind of valuing that, which I encourage everybody to do. Get away this summer, recharge. That's the most important resource we have.
That's a perfect message, Andy, and I totally agree. I mean, we all work long hours to get our jobs done. We do what it takes, and it's great for you to be able to retire and be able to spend time doing what you want to do. And it's good that all of us can hopefully enjoy some summer before our audits and all that, even if it's a long weekend or a week off. We all kind of need to recharge, and hopefully don't check your email during that time.
If you can.
Congratulations, Andy. We're going to miss you here.
Yeah, my thoughts exactly. We're really going to miss you.
I appreciate that.
We might miss you, Andy.
WASBO's in great hands. You guys got some great things going on, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it, at least the last year or two, in the direction that we're going. So, yeah.
Well, Mike is literally probably sick to his stomach. That's why he can't even be here, because you're leaving, Andy. So, but I am positive he sends his well wishes as well.
So
I
our next money talks is so we have July off. So I mean we're all off the month of July, right? So we're back in August 28th. Hopefully we'll get the topic out sooner than a day before the money talks episode, but promise it'll be a good one. Uh, Maybe we'll have some surprise guests at that time too. So everyone have a wonderful summer and thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye all.